go. No, it's okay.
Mm-hmm.
You're fine. He's cut out stimulus. He's cutting the number of H-1Bs that can come in the country.
Mm-hmm.
Guys, fucking nuts. Has the call started?
No, it starts at 4:30.
All right.
Well, it is 4:30. This is George Gauze with HP staff. I see that we're still waiting on a couple of our commissioners to get in. I just want to make sure they get a chance to connect to the meeting, so let's give them a couple more minutes.
HBC commissioners? No?
Yeah. Okay, I think we can go ahead and get started. Hello, this is George Gause. I'm on HP staff. Um, Welcome to the Heritage Preservation Commission public listening session on bias and exclusion. The Heritage Preservation Commission is a 13 volunteer member commission that review applications for projects at heritage sites or within heritage districts. Commission also serves as an advisory body to the St. Paul Mayor and City Council on historic preservation. We realize that people are utilizing different means to participate with this meeting. So because of this, we're not gonna show anything on the screen. So we're equitable to everyone that's part of this meeting. The session is an opportunity for the public to address the commissioners and city staff on the issues of bias and exclusion with historic preservation. Sorry, I'm letting people into the room, so I have to. The Heritage Preservation Commission held a roundtable of its members on August 24th, 2020. They discussed bias and exclusion in heritage preservation. Two focus statements were considered by commission members. One, historic preservation could result in economic exclusion, creating contemporary form of redlining. And two, designated sites can perpetuate a divisive form of nostalgia that may tell narratives of the culturally privileged. The results from the roundtable were further discussed by the HPC at their regular meeting on September 21st. 7 follow-up action items were addressed. 1, find ways to focus on community preservation. 2, create heritage preservation equity goals. 3, educate the public, city staff, elected officials, and commissioners. 4, have a future listening session dedicated to the topics of bias and exclusion, which is what we're doing this evening. 5, consider what a only cultural district would entail. 6, how the HPC can preserve the history of everyday common people. And 7, how we effectively serve and engage all residents of St. Paul. We've heard from residents prior to our roundtable and after our September 21st HPC meeting that they would like the opportunity to address the commission. So we're holding this public listening session to ask a couple questions and focus on a couple questions. What should the HPC be working on to create equitable, lasting change? And are there specific policies or regulations that should be altered to advance equity? Please be courteous and respectful when speaking. Commissioners and city staff are not going to debate or answer questions. If you have questions for us to consider, please contact staff. You can contact staff a couple different ways: by email at askhpc@stpaul.gov, and that's askhpc@stpaul.gov, or you can give us a call at 651-266-9078. Please keep your comments to 2 or 3 minutes, and then start each comment by stating your name. And I have received a couple of emails from folks who are unable to attend tonight, but they did want some comments read into the meeting for consideration. My first one is from Diane and Carol, and they want the HPC to consider that the National Register of Historic Places has 3 criteria for inclusion: age, integrity, and significance. And they feel that the HPC needs to consider items that are not just the built environment, specifically the St. Paul Yacht Club, or St. Paul Motorboat Club. Uh, they feel that the age of the motorboat club, which was founded in 1912, um, is past the 50-year mark. The integrity, they've been located on the Mississippi River in downtown St. Paul and at Harriet Island for their entire life, through floods, 2 world wars, Great Depression, multiple recessions, pandemics, and environmental calamities. City's first public health officer was involved heavily, and there's multitudes of significance, including the Hubbards and the Mayo family and the founders of KSTP. So, and then the second email I received was from John, and John wants to state that, and I quote, "We have always encouraged homeowners to invest in their homes in their neighborhoods. This will increase the city's tax base and provide funding for needed improvements and essential services. People will make these investments if they have confidence there will be a fair return. Encouraging this will attract new buyers with new money to improve their properties. This will happen whether it's in a historic district or not. Well-kept historic districts are a sign of a healthy community that will help provide support for everyone." So those are the only comments I received in advance that they asked to be read. So I will open this to the public. Remember, a couple minutes each. Please start with your name. There's no formality here. Just be courteous. Thanks.
George, this is Mark Verding. Could I get some clarification before I even ask questions? And that is, where does the state, you made the statement, preserve heritage for everyday people. And I find nothing in the ordinance, nothing in the heritage preservation standards that talks about the heritage of everyday people. It's properties that are targeted. So could you tell me where that comes from?
Well, that's from our HPC roundtable and discussions we had after that roundtable. That was one of the things that commissioners thought that we should work on. So.
Okay, but that's outside your prerogative. Well, in my opinion. But anyway, I'm sorry. You can proceed.
Well, that's fine. These things may require us to change some of our ordinance. So.
Okay. Well, I have some other questions for later.
If I may start.
Sure.
Okay, this is Diane Scoville, and I'm with the St. Paul Marina. And you mostly read everything, and I appreciate that, George. I think what you're doing is a remarkable opening up of the idea of what is historic and what qualifies as something that is buildings and more. I mean, we are certainly a city that has embraced the river. We were founded on the river, and then over time we turned away from the river, and now we're turning back to the river. And so you might think of this as kind of a special people with lots of money. It's a marina that affords access to the river for a wide cross-section of people. And I'm just saying that considering this historic spot is, I think, in the best interest of St. Paul, in the sense that we've been there for a very long time. We're invested, our tax dollars go into St. Paul, and when you have those photographs in the paper of the new Great River greening, there's always a boat floating down there, and it affords people like myself, a retired school teacher, to be able to have access to the river in ways I could not afford otherwise. And so we're safe and affordable boating. We're also grounded in St. Paul. No, Minneapolis doesn't have this. So I think we're special, and we're very open to trying to make this even more accessible to not only residents in St. Paul, but people from around the region.
Great, thanks.
Thank you.
Hello there.
Hello?
Hi, can we just jump in with comments?
That would be fine. Yep.
Okay.
And so that your career, which you won't actually know what your career is or until the end of your career, until you decide this. Even then, you might still do something.
Is someone else providing a comment, or is that background noise?
I think it's background noise. Folks, can you please mute unless you're speaking? Thank you.
Hi there. So my name is Merritt Clapp Smith, and I'm a resident in downtown St. Paul. I think historic preservation is really important. I think it's great that the city and the Historic Preservation Commission are looking at these issues to broaden perspective on what can be considered historically and culturally significant by different constituencies around the city. So I'm very supportive of that. You know, when you look at defining significance, I don't know how the Historic Preservation Commission is going to sort of redefine that, but you know, it's in the eye of the beholder. And so among different groups of people, they will have certain things they find to be culturally significant or relevant, and other people won't. So I wish you luck in coming up with what that criteria is to make sure that the value is not just determined by one perspective. I do think it's very important to preserve special buildings in the city, particularly those that are of a type that we might not ever see again, whether they're expensive or not expensive, that they're kind of a unique representation. I do not support the creation of sort of large-scale historic residential districts that make it difficult sometimes to do some of the improvements, particularly around energy issues that people might be looking to do, or at least to set standards that are a little bit more flexible for people. I also don't want to see residential districts being used as a way to prevent redevelopment of properties or infill. You know, you might have a residential district and decide that a certain portion of the buildings, you know, meet a criteria, but it shouldn't be a flat out prohibition that covers the entire thing and essentially shuts down change. We have to give access to all our neighborhoods for new housing and new folks and diversity of housing. Thank you.
Thank you.
You may want to jump in.
Anyone
Hi,
else?
everybody. My name is, hi there. My name is Jen Swarner. I'm the Executive Director of the Summit University Planning Council. We have a large part of our district is a historic area, and we're very interested in this conversation. We're thankful that you're all here and that this is being talked about. I would like to hear from the commission. You know, I'm reading the notice that went out. In point 1, historic preservation could result in economic exclusion, creating a form of redlining. I think it might help to define what redlining is for a community who's on this call to maybe help set the tone of this meeting so that it, you know, we tighten up and we're not talking about like that we're really being focused on redlining and those impacts on St. Paul. Do you think you could take a minute to talk about that, George?
Well, Jens, that was a conversation that the commission held a roundtable in August on, and they considered, it was almost 2 hours. They considered all those questions and decided that this is probably something that we need to just open to the public and ask the couple of questions.
Right, and I'm just asking for the sake of the public, could you explain what redlining is?
Well, it's creating exclusion in a certain area. So we didn't want to focus specifically on that. We wanted to open this up so we could hear from the community and hear from folks what their thoughts were. Is there anyone else would like to give some comments?
Go ahead. He's going to shut it off.
George, Mark Verding again. Are there? Can we continue to send in comments for further discussion after this meeting?
Yeah, If you have a general question,
it sounded like this was our only chance, and speak now or hold your peace.
No, this I don't think this will be your only chance. This is just the first kind of meeting like this we're having, just to gauge the public, get some comments from folks. We heard from a lot of people, they wanted to speak. So if you have some questions for the commissioners to consider, I think that would be fantastic.
Okay, I will mail those. I will send them in via email because there's a long list.
Oh, okay, that's fine too. Ask hpc@stpaul.gov.
Thank you.
Sorry, George. I was bumped off the call actually, and I had to call back in, so I missed your response to my question, and that's fine. I'd just like to also add that the district councils, the Summit University Planning Council, and possibly other district councils will be interested in holding community forums to expand on tonight's meeting to ensure that folks have a chance to participate. And we welcome you all to come participate. Thank you.
It's great.
This is Merritt again. For people like me that are new to this conversation, it might be helpful to understand what prompted this, if there were some specific cases that elevated this to people's attention, or if it's kind of a general recognition that, in all sorts of different areas and topics, we need to better address being inclusive and recognizing the value of different places and folks and
Sure.
history.
Well, this has always been something that in my career in preservation, I think it's always had some undercurrent. There's always been some talk of preservation being used for redlining or to restrict residency in a certain area. But I think it really was the murder of George Floyd that brought all of this to the forefront in many different areas, not just historic preservation, especially in our city. And then the historic preservation profession began to speak about this, and there was a conference held on deconstructing historic preservation and talking about redlining, talking about the culturally privileged narratives and things. And that kind of staff kind of took that, and we talked with the commissioners. We had our roundtable discussion. We had a follow-up to that. And we heard from folks they wanted to have this just a general listening session. And I'm sorry, I know it's kind of clunky not having an in-person listening session. We obviously can't do that with COVID-19, but we wanted to not wait. We wanted to go ahead and have something. We don't see this as this is it, done. We see this is a beginning of something. The commission will be considering work plan for 2021 here very soon. And there are some things we want to put on it, some of the action items. And we wanted to hear from folks. What do they think? I think it's an excellent comment about it's going to be a challenge to find a multi-perspective cultural significance and the challenges of that. So, we have almost 30 people on the call, so it'd be great if people have some comments, go ahead and speak.
So this is Gladhill, and when I'm looking at the agenda for the 4 points talking about considering what a cultural district, non-architecture based, would entail. One of the elements that it's long looked at, the establishment of the historic district, was the idea of historic conservation districts, and that hasn't really gone anywhere. My thesis on it is 20 years old, and it hasn't really touched beyond that since then. But that seems to be a really viable topic that the city's kind of long ignored, honestly.
Bethany, did we lose you?
No, I'm clear.
You were breaking up a little bit there.
But I wonder what work the city has done.
George, this is Mary Texer, and I really think that you're looking at the wrong problem. I think that what you need to look at is how we can use equity and inclusion so that people can afford to buy houses anywhere in the city. There are some districts that have been set up to preserve the heritage and history of the city, and that's a good thing. And we can take advantage of some of the new things, new energy, new materials, without destroying that. But I really think that that's not the issue. The issue is how can people of all backgrounds afford a home and then maintain it.
Okay.
George, this is Carol Clark. One thing to add onto what Mary and Mark have said, and actually Bethany, has anyone really taken the time to explain the evolution of the neighborhood? You know, what it was, the people that, you know, were involved and engaged in the historic preservation, who intention was to preserve, right, these houses, not to exclude anyone, you know. Has the whole evolution ever been explained to anybody involved in this who raised these issues?
That's a good point.
This is Bethany. Following up on those points, looking at the house that's 2 down from us, which was one of the at the university.
Bethany, we're losing you. You're breaking up.
Thanks, sorry. I don't think that's replacing any, so replacing a $200,000 place where an elderly person had been living for the last 75 years with a $500,000 new piece, I don't think is providing any kind of diversity in housing to anyone or any kind of ability for seniors to stay in their homes. And I think we should be looking at this citywide. A lot of the houses that we should be looking to preserve are ones that people have been in for a long time and would like to stay in.
Okay.
Right, and I mean, this is Carol again. I think to that point, you know, people are splitting off their lots and then, you know, building these bigger homes that sometimes aren't what one would want to see, not just in this neighborhood, but any neighborhood as far as being close, etc. And those homes, the new homes, sometimes are more expensive than the ones that are, you know, in existence. But that, you know, again, that's a decision that the city has made. And I think that excludes a lot of people. And sometimes it's not necessarily the ones that are already built and occupied market for sale. It's when these other structures start coming into play. I mean, I think you can talk to a lot of us that, you know, especially, you know, Mark and Mary, who are part of the original, you know, people in the neighborhood. A lot of people came in here that didn't have money. It was, again, preservation, old homes being preserved. Didn't matter who you were. If you had a vested interest in the neighborhood and historic preservation, this was the place to be.
This is Merritt.
George, this is,
Sorry, go ahead.
no, you go ahead.
I just wanted to quickly acknowledge the comments about tear downs of naturally occurring affordable housing and being replaced by more expensive homes. That's a really important and concerning trend that St. Paul sees in so many other places. I doubt that something is ever torn down and replaced with a similarly priced or less expensive home unless it's purchased for the intent of affordable housing that's subsidized. So I think the question is, to what extent is historic preservation designation the right tool to prevent the loss of smaller, naturally occurring affordable units? And are there other tools in the toolbox? And then if you are designating a district, you know, is it having unintended consequences to that beneficial outcome?
George, this is Mark Verding again, and I think a couple of good questions have been raised, and that one is, what has the city done to create situations that prevent diversity or force people out of their homes because they can't keep them up? Because the city has been an active player in that.
Okay.
Hey, George. This is Carey with Historic St. Paul. And is everybody just calling in? Is there a video aspect of the meeting, or is it just all calling?
There's nothing on the screen. Yeah.
Okay. I just wanted to add a couple of comments. Part of it is getting to that the first question about everyday common history and whether, you know, it's the HPC's purview. And I think that kind of ties back to the item number 2 that the HPC considered at their roundtable meeting about designation can perpetuate a divisive form of nostalgia and tell narratives of culturally privileged. I think that can happen if, you know, the stories that are gathered and the structures that are recognized as significant are limited to the culture, you know, to specific stories. And I do feel that, you know, telling more representative stories of the history and development of St. Paul is really important. And I think that you can do that through the identification of specific structures that help convey those stories, that to Merritt's point about being representative. And I also think that we have a lot of work to do, which is really, I commend you for having this discussion, because I think it is really a good time to acknowledge that, you know, that heritage preservation in St. Paul has been relatively limited. I know that you've done a lot of work with context studies, whether it's, you know, commerce-based or development-based or religious-based, that do capture more stories. But I don't think that's necessarily been built in really effectively into the designation process or the HPC's work plan. And I also think that there's just a huge chunk or a huge source of stories and information from different cultural communities in St. Paul that are really important. You know, I was lucky to be involved in as a partner with the African American Cultural Context Study a number of years ago, and that was a really good start to putting some of that information about the history and contributions of the African American population in St. Paul into the kind of framework that could be used for, you know, within the preservation sphere or field. And I think that we really could use, you know, a lot more of that. I think that we could use a Jewish context study. I think we could use a Latino context study. I think that we could use a Southeast Asian context study to really document and elevate the stories of the diversity of cultural communities that make up St. Paul. And I'd really encourage the HPC to use some of this time in this discussion to possibly move some of those initiatives forward. I think we'd have a much more representative group of stories and structures if that were to happen than we currently do. I know I was involved in the early days of the Dayton's Bluff designation and nomination. And I know at the time there was a lot of pushback because it was a working class neighborhood, and there was a lot of sense, or there was a good deal of sense that, you know, why are those stories important? You know, why are we telling those stories? Why do we want to preserve those neighborhoods or that neighborhood and those stories? And I think that, you know, overall, it's been very effective. Yes, there are challenges dealing with some of the preservation guidelines, but I think at the core, preservation is really about maintenance, and it's about maintaining property and neighborhoods in sensitive ways. So I think that some of the comments that Bethany was making about conservation districts are also really a good thing to explore and an important tool that we could maybe embrace. And also just the possibility of really expanding our educational efforts and technical assistance and maybe financial incentives to really help promote the preservation of building and housing stock in some of the oldest neighborhoods in St. Paul that maybe are not currently designated.
Great. Any other comments?
Yeah, I'll jump in again. So I'm thinking about it, some of the things that I'm hearing are ideas and maybe ways that HPC can expand the good that it does, right? The protection that it may be able to offer, right? The preservation, of course, but what I'm not hearing, and I guess when I had read the notice of the meeting, I had interpreted it differently. I'm not hearing about maybe possibly some of the harms, that come from situations from this work. And I think that in order to do well for community, we also should be talking about those or exploring those. Because, especially within our own bubbles, it's really hard to see how we could be harming others. And I'm just wondering, has there been conversation about that?
There has. There was some of that came up in the roundtable and the discussion after that, and we had some speakers talking about the harm of creating historic districts. And we need to make sure that we're not creating historic districts for alternative purposes. Basically, I think that was Merritt was kind of talking about that. So.
Oh, okay, good. Sorry, to clarify, I meant current harm that could be done, right, as you're considering potential harms that could happen if things are changed. Maybe that distinction would help.
Okay, that's something for the HPC to consider. Yeah.
This is Carol Clark. I kind of don't get that. Are you saying like harm in that we would lose the historic character of buildings, or harm for people? If you could just explain a little bit so I understand.
Yeah, and I really appreciate the question. And that's exactly what I meant when I said that it's, sometimes hard to envision these things from within our own bubbles. Some of the critiques that I hear about historic preservation districts in general, especially how they contribute to racial inequity, is that, when it became illegal to restrict housing in areas based on race in 1968, these sorts of commissions or governing bodies or judging bodies or things that operate within this function popped up, and those roots are really held within places of preserving whiteness in areas. And that's a critique that I hear out in community and from other cities as well. I mean, this is, a nationwide thing. Actually came up at the conference that...
Well, I mean, given that...
Perhaps this is something that came up at that conference that you attended, George?
Yes, that was Deconstructing Preservation conference, and it's a group that's forming, and they have talked about that and pretty thoroughly. Yeah.
Well, I guess to that point, I mean the diversity has to be more right than just a specific class or race, if you will, right? I mean, I agree you have to look within your own bubble, but living in this neighborhood, I feel that there is diversity in race, religion, the LGBT community, and we can always do better, of course. But I think sometimes when we focus on one, then like I mean, when I heard that about, basically the African American community in my neighborhood, my husband's African American, and I'm like, well, wait, he's here, and not that it's one, do you know what I'm saying? But that we don't see it as, how can I put this? Maybe as it's just the Black community, that you should be looking at everyone, right?
At the time the St. Paul Historic Districts were formed, this is Mary Texer, it was to preserve the neighborhoods because they were being torn down. Minneapolis tore down stuff and St. Paul preserved it. And I think we need to be proud of that because we've got that housing, we've got the buildings that Minneapolis just summarily destroyed.
Well, and I think to that point also, I mean, if you look at even what happened to downtown St. Paul and the way it looks today versus the way it looked many years ago with all those beautiful buildings that are gone. And it was, it was too late. They're gone. You couldn't preserve them. You'll still see some downtown, right? But just imagine what the city would look like, St. Paul, if those buildings would have been preserved as they did, for quite a few of the homes on, in our neighborhood.
Bethany again, and
Bethany, you're breaking up.
This is Bethany again, and to follow up on those points, maybe part of the problem is that our historic districts are too few and too successful. So we took the easy pickings of some of the districts with larger properties or elements earlier, though of course Summit Hill is still not a statewide, or is only a statewide historic district, not a local one. So we took the easy pickings early on, and those have become very successful. People have moved in, people look into those houses. Part of the problem is that maybe we have too few historic districts. Dayton's Bluff is our only representative, really, at this point, of a working class district. We should be looking at more of them and more conservation districts that more fairly reflect the history of the city. In some places like Bozeman, Montana, the entire city is some kind of preservational historic district, and Bozeman's a lot younger than we are.
I actually, Bethany, this is Elise Jensen. I agree. It's interesting as you reflect on the discussions these days, because I live in Irvine Park Historic District, and it actually is a historically redlined neighborhood. And I live a block and a half from Section 8 housing, a few blocks from major commercial development. So really broadly, I can definitely understand where people are coming from, and I understand some of the evils that can be done through the improper use of historic districts. But in our community specifically, the only locally designated districts, George, correct me if I'm wrong, but are Lower Town, Dayton's Bluff, and Irvine Park, and then a thematic historic district related to the limestone houses, correct? Are there any other that require actual permit review at this point?
Yeah, we have 9 districts, 9 historic districts.
Okay, so where are they?
About
Can you look where they are?
About 2,200 properties are designated, have to go through local review for permitting, so.
Okay, so I guess, maybe, sorry, I'm a little off on that one, but it seems to me the discussion that comes up over and over is that the preservationists are standing in the way of development, and I really think we need to frame the conversation as the city is doing a lot of good for development and dense housing right now. Great, there are champions there. There are people that are clearly doing good things. We should also, in tandem, be using the tools we have, to add to affordable housing, to add to diversity, not this kind of divisive back and forth. One is bad, one is good. They're both good. They both have excellent applications. They both can have terrible examples in the wrong instance. But so I also think there needs to be some broad education around the history of the districts in our community and how preservation can be used to further the narrative of the people, just like Carey said much more eloquently than I am at this point. So that's it.
This is Carey Kimker. I'm one of the HPC commissioners, and I just wanted to maybe wanted to clear up some confusion about the historic districts, because even though the HPC, there are locally designated districts, but under the agreement with the Park Service and the State Preservation Society, we are the body that reviews applications and
hi everybody.
Designations for both the
Rolling that mountain goat just makes me happy.
And the fully designated districts in the cities. So that's why there's more police than you were thinking when George answered your question.
Overwhelmed. I mean, in a good way.
Okay,
No, please, because I've already forgotten the
sorry, can you mute, please? We seem to be losing some folks. Are there some, we seem to be losing some folks. Are there some closing comments anybody wants to make? Did anyone not get to make a comment they wanted to make? Or you could also email staff or give us a call after the meeting if you'd like. And if you just want to talk to us one-on-one, that's fine too. You don't want to talk in person. And Commissioner Paroka, I see your hand up. Do you want to speak?
Yes, thank you, George. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, excellent. I just want to thank everyone that is coming and for their comments. And for you for organizing this, and just say a few things in general about my perspective of the City of St. Paul HPC and going forward, that I do see a bright future, but I also see some of the problems in the current historic districts and in the past. But going forward, there's a quote by a historic preservationist, Max Page, who wrote in a book, Why Preservation Matters, that at the 50th anniversary in 2016, Page argues that if preservation is to play a central role in building more just communities, it must transform itself to stand against gentrification, work more closely with the environmental sustainability movement, and challenge societies to confront their past. And I think that this first listening session is a good start to doing that, and I'm looking forward to more listening sessions and more input from different groups and individuals. So thank you, George.
Well, and thank you everyone for attending. This is great. This isn't the end of these. We intend to have some more actions here. Not sure if it's going to be how it's going to be. Hopefully, we don't live in COVID land forever, and we can begin to start to have some of these back in person again. So what I'll do is I will type up our notes. We will post these on our website like we always do, and we'll have the commission consider these just for a little bit on the October 19th HPC meeting, regular meeting at 3:30, and we'll begin these discussions on how this gets moved into a work plan item for the HPC to start considering. So thanks, everybody.
George,
Yes.
George, can I ask a quick question?
Sure, go ahead.
In order to, this is Mark Verding, in order to kind of formulate my thoughts, has the city received any complaints about people who think they are being shut out?
Well, I can say the HP staff and HPC haven't received any specific complaints. We do from time to time have issues with folks and work and affordability and things like that. We deal with that a lot.
Because it seems to me, after listening to today's group and also some of the things on the website, is that this is more of a solution looking for a problem than a problem looking for a solution.
Okay.
I think it should be noted that some of our city council members are on record saying those things. So I think that's for some, I mean, in addition to the obvious changes that we need to make as a society that have been brought to light more prominently since the George Floyd murder, some of our city council people have been on record and saying these things. So I think that's also part of the impetus for why there's a response right now.
When you say, this is Jane Scoville, when they saying these things, what things are they saying?
Mitra Nelson specifically, or sorry, Jalali specifically said that historic districts are redlining. If you just search her name in preservation, you'll find the article. I think it came out a month or two ago.
Okay. And frankly, just as a counterpunch to the gentleman's comment, I think this is a refreshing way of looking at our history in ways that we haven't, and taking and getting out of our bubbles and looking at St. Paul and our including everyone. So I say good work and thank you very much, George.
Well, it's not just me; it's the HPC and the HP staff as well. So, thank you.
This is Carey again, and I echo that. I think that it's a really important time to be taking this seriously. Unfortunately, in St. Paul anyway, despite a lot of good that preservation has done, and it has done a lot, it's been primarily a white activity in a lot of ways. And I think, again, that possibly gets back to the kind of stories that we acknowledged and are recognizing and are telling and protecting. But I and I'm sorry, I accidentally pushed, cut off after Jen was asked her question. So I didn't get to participate in that discussion. But I do think that it's important to acknowledge that, yes, historic preservation has caused the economic revival of some very disinvested areas, but it has also resulted in gentrification and displacement. And, I think that needs to be just, really honestly discussed when we're talking about preservation. And it is economically, it builds wealth. And I think that we have to be really cognizant and intentional about who we're offering those benefits to. I mean, obviously, a well-preserved building is a benefit to a small business. A well-preserved house is a benefit to a homeowner. And I really think it's important to be considering all these things and to be really intentional about making those economic benefits of preservation, not just the acknowledgement and elevation of the stories, but the real economic benefits available to a broader audience. I know that, again, back in Dayton's Bluff, which is an important frame of reference for me because I lived here for 35 years. But, when we pursued the designation of the district back in 91, 92, I think it was designated. Right now, our neighborhood is more diverse ethnically, racially, and economically than it was when the district went into effect. And although, is there room for improvement? Absolutely. But I think, to Bethany's point about neighborhoods and about, finding a way to make them work in neighborhood preservation, I think that there are benefits to be had. And I think that part of being able to leverage those benefits is being honest about some of the negative effects that communities have experienced as a result of preservation as well.
Great. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. We will type up some notes here. The commission will consider this again on the 19th of October of what was said here today. Watch our agendas and early notification system for the city of St. Paul for future meetings. So, and I'll just, we'll close it here, and thanks for participating.
Thank you.
Thanks. Yep. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.